You wouldn't expect a man like Nathan Cole to become one of the most wanted fugitives in America. In small-town Riverton, Kansas, his name once meant nothing more than a skinny kid from a broken-down farmhouse at the edge of a cornfield. People saw him running errands for neighbors, hauling water for the livestock, or leaning against the rusted mailbox by County Road 12. There was nothing remarkable about him, except maybe the way he kept to himself, head down, as though the world had already decided who he was. Nathan was born in the summer of 1970, in a year when the wheat harvest was thin and the banks were repossessing more farms than anyone could remember. His father, Walter Cole, had returned from the Vietnam War with a drinking habit and a hair-trigger temper. His mother, Margaret, was the only buffer between him and the rages that came late at night. She worked at a local diner, saving tips in a coffee tin for school clothes and maybe a used bike. When Nathan was 10, liver disease took her. The funeral was small. The town pastor said words about faith and endurance. Walter Cole stood silent, a cigarette burning down to the filter in his hand. Within months, he remarried a woman named Luann who brought 2 more mouths to feed, on top of the 3 kids Walter already had. 7 people in a 2-bedroom farmhouse meant tempers ran short, and in Walter's case, fists often followed. School wasn't much of a refuge. Kansas had a policy of free public education, but in Riverton, free meant your family still had to pony up for activity fees, classroom supplies, and the so-called voluntary donations everyone knew weren't voluntary at all. If you couldn't pay, teachers found ways to remind you. Sometimes it was a sarcastic comment about pulling your weight. Sometimes it was leaving you out of class projects. For Nathan, it was all of the above. Kids noticed. They laughed when his shoes split at the seams, when his hand-me-down shirts hung too loose, when he brought lunch in a paper bag stained with grease from the night before. Humiliation came daily, a slow poison that ate away at whatever belief he still had in playing by the rules. By the time he turned 15, that belief was gone. His first real step over the line was small, a stolen watermelon from the display outside Carter's grocery. It was hot that summer, the kind of heat that bakes the fields dry and leaves you dizzy by mid-afternoon. Nathan claimed he just wanted something cold to eat. Maybe he thought no one would notice. But someone did. Walter Cole noticed. And instead of covering for his boy, he called the sheriff. It's hard to say what hurt Nathan more, the cold look on his father's face as the deputy led him away, or the fact that no one in town seemed surprised. At Riverton High, news spread fast. Within a day, his teachers knew. They didn't see a kid who made a bad decision. They saw trouble. By the end of that week, the school board had expelled him. He'd only been in high school for 3 months. Walter had 2 options. Bring Nathan home, try to fight the expulsion, maybe get him into a different school, or send him to the state juvenile facility in Wichita. Walter chose Wichita. The decision wasn't dressed up with speeches about discipline or reform. He simply told Luann he was washing his hands of the boy. Nathan spent 6 months behind those brick walls, surrounded by other kids who had long since stopped believing in second chances. If the state thought they could scare him straight, they were wrong. The time inside didn't make him grateful for freedom. It made him sharper. He learned how to keep his mouth shut, how to read people fast, and how to see opportunity where others saw only walls. When he came home, there was no welcome. Walter had already converted Nathan's old bedroom into a storage space. Nathan slept in the shed for a while, then on a friend's couch, until he found work sweeping floors at a garage on Main Street. He got paid under the table, which meant there was nothing to stop him from picking up side jobs that weren't exactly legal. A stolen radio here, a set of tires there. The kind of small-town thefts people don't report because they know they won't get their stuff back anyway. For Nathan, it was never about the money. It was about control, the rush of taking something because he decided to, not because it was given to him. The arrests started piling up. Petty theft, trespassing, fighting behind the VFW hall. Judges sent him back to Wichita, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. By 19, the juvenile system had given way to the adult one, and Nathan found himself doing stints in the county jail. Through it all, there were moments, brief, flickering, when things could have gone another way. A mechanic named Doug offered to teach him real repair work. A neighbor offered to co-sign a lease on a small apartment. Nathan said no both times. Maybe he didn't trust them. Maybe he didn't trust himself. What's certain is that by 22, he was done with Riverton. The town had given him nothing but a rap sheet and a bad reputation. That winter, he left with 4 guys he'd grown up with, men who shared his taste for quick cash and the thrill of pushing limits. They drove east toward New York City, telling themselves they'd find work on the docks or in construction. But the jobs didn't come, and neither did the patience to wait for them. The plan they settled on wasn't much of a plan at all. a grab-and-go robbery of a stationery supply store in Queens. They figured the register would have a few $100, maybe a safe in the back with more. But plans have a way of falling apart the moment real fear enters the room. It was supposed to be quick. In and out in 5 minutes. But when the owner resisted, one of Nathan's friends pulled a knife. The struggle lasted seconds. By the time Nathan realized what was happening, the man on the floor wasn't moving. The knife was slick with blood. They ran. The city swallowed them, but not for long. Within days, 3 of the crew were in custody. Nathan wasn't one of them. He slipped out of the borough and headed south, hitchhiking through Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. Every day was a gamble, one wrong turn, one curious cop, and it would be over. It took 6 months before his luck ran out. He was picked up in Norfolk after a botched break-in at a warehouse left him limping from a deep cut on his leg. The trial didn't last long. Under federal law, it didn't matter that he hadn't wielded the knife. He was still an accomplice to felony murder. The judge's gavel came down hard. Life in prison, no parole. His destination was Redgate Federal Penitentiary, a place so locked down that old-timers swore it could hold the devil himself. And yet, sitting in the back of that transport van, shackles biting into his wrists, Nathan Cole wasn't thinking about life sentences or moral reckonings. He was thinking about walls. How tall they'd be. How thick. And where, in all that concrete and steel, the first crack might be hiding. The transport van pulled off the interstate just after dawn. Nathan could see the place before the driver even said a word. Redgate Federal Penitentiary rose out of the flat Kansas plains like something built to outlast time itself. A block of gray stone and steel ringed with razor wire, guard towers at each corner, their windows black and unreadable. Even from a distance, the place radiated finality. The tires crunched over gravel as they rolled toward the main gate. The air smelled faintly of dust and oil. Nathan's wrists were raw from the cuffs, his legs stiff from hours of sitting. He tried to sleep on the ride but couldn't. The chain between his ankles kept him from shifting more than a few inches. When the van stopped, the guards didn't waste time. 2 of them hauled him out, patted him down, and marched him toward intake. The door shut behind him with a metallic echo that seemed to seal off whatever was left of his life before this moment. Intake was a stripped-down process. Strip search, delousing spray, prison-issued khakis and boots. His old clothes, jeans, shirt, the boots he'd worn since Norfolk, went into a paper bag marked with his inmate number. A guard read the number aloud, then locked the bag in a steel cabinet. That was the last Nathan would see of anything that had once been his. The warden wasn't there to greet him. Redgate didn't bother with ceremony for new arrivals. The place housed some of the most violent and persistent offenders in the federal system. Nathan at 22 was younger than most, but his file carried the word lifer, and that put him in a category with men who had long ago stopped counting the years. A corrections officer named Harris walked him to his cell. "Single occupancy," Harris said. "Warden thinks you'll adjust better without a roommate." The cell door opened with a buzz. Inside was a steel bed bolted to the wall, a thin mattress, a toilet in the corner, and a slit of a window too high to reach. "Breakfast is at 6, yard at 9, count 3 times a day," Harris said. "Learn the routine. Don't make trouble." Then the door clanged shut and Nathan was alone. The first weeks blurred together. Mornings were the sound of keys turning, boots on concrete, the clang of doors. Afternoons were a different rhythm, the shuffle of inmates to and from the yard, the occasional shout or fight echoing down the block. Nights were the hardest. In the quiet, Nathan's thoughts circled back to Riverton, to his mother's voice, to that hot day outside Carter's Market. He told himself the past was dead weight. But the memories didn't care. At Redgate, respect came slowly, if at all. You earned it by keeping your head down and your word solid. Nathan did both. He wasn't big enough to intimidate anyone, but he was quick with his hands and quicker with his eyes. He learned who owed favors to whom, which guards could be talked to, and which you stayed invisible around. It was during one of those nights, lying on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling, that he first noticed it, the faint hiss of air from the corner above the toilet. There, almost hidden in shadow, was a metal grate, a ventilation shaft barred with 2 thick rods. Too narrow for a man his size, but not impossible. For now, it was just an observation. But Nathan had been watching and measuring since the day his father turned him in. He didn't know when the idea would take hold, only that once it did, it wouldn't let go. A month later, he was assigned to the prison's woodworking shop. The job didn't pay much, a few cents an hour, but it got him out of the cell and into a place where tools were plentiful and supervision was limited. He kept his head down, learning how to sand, plane, and cut wood cleanly. The guards liked him. He worked hard, didn't complain, and never pocketed anything obvious. What they didn't see was the day he palmed a small saw blade, slid it into the space beneath the rubber sole of his boot, and walked back to his cell with a weapon no bigger than his hand. Nathan didn't start sawing right away. That would have been reckless. He needed to understand the rhythms of Redgate. When the noise in the block was loud enough to cover the rasp of metal on metal, when the guards walked past without looking in when inspections happened. Evenings turned out to be perfect. Between 6 and 8, during rec time, music piped through the intercom into the common areas. Inmates laughed, argued over card games, made enough noise to hide a lot. 20 minutes a night, no more. Afterward, he'd plug the groove in the metal with gum, smooth it with his thumb until it looked untouched. Progress was slow. The bars were thick and the angle was awkward. His shoulders burned after each session. But slow was safe, and safe was the only way forward. He counted the days not in a calendar sense, but in the feel of the blade biting deeper into steel. As winter settled over Kansas, another problem became clear. Even if the bars came out, he wouldn't fit. The duct was narrow, maybe 12 inches across, 11 high. Nathan was lean but not lean enough. So he began to eat less. Not enough to raise suspicion, just enough that his clothes started to hang looser. When other inmates asked if he was sick, he'd shrug and say the food didn't sit right. 2 months later, he'd dropped nearly 35 pounds. The sawed bars were loose enough to wiggle. The duct was no longer just a possibility, it was a door. What he didn't have yet was the key, the right moment. Redgate's towers were manned 24/7. The yard was open space, easy to watch. The outer walls stood 15 feet high, topped with coils of wire. Escaping wasn't just about getting out of the cell, it was about getting past all of that without being seen. The answer came from an unexpected place: construction. The prison was adding a new chapel, and for months crews had been in and out, bringing materials, leaving stacks of lumber and scaffolding in the yard. The site was a mess, full of blind spots and unmonitored corners. From his cell window, Nathan could see where the new wall met the old, leaving a gap in the tower guard's line of sight. It was all theory for now. But in Nathan's mind, the pieces were starting to fit. A hole in the bars. A body that could slip through. A construction zone no one was watching too closely. The kind of opening a man could wait a lifetime for, if he had the patience to take it. By January of his second year inside Redgate, Nathan Cole had been living with the plan so long it felt like a second heartbeat. Every day, the vent above the toilet reminded him what was possible. Every night, as the cell block went dark, he ran the escape in his mind from start to finish. He knew each step like a craftsman knows the grain of wood, the sound the bars would make when they finally gave, the feel of cold air on his face as he slid inside the duct, the moment his feet would hit the ground outside the cell block. Patience had kept him alive so far. Patience, and the understanding that one wrong move would erase 2 years of quiet work. But by midwinter, the construction site for the new chapel had reached the perfect stage. Scaffolding stacked high against the wall, materials scattered in messy piles, and most importantly, a blind spot between the west tower and the southeast corner. He'd watched the guards from his narrow window for weeks. That corner fell out of view every 30 seconds when the tower guards swapped angles. 30 seconds was enough. If he didn't hesitate, the date chose itself. Monday, January 17, 1999. Mondays meant a smaller night shift. Budget cuts, Nathan guessed. The chapel crew didn't work Mondays either, so the site would be empty. He spent that day in the woodworking shop as if nothing had changed, planing rough pine boards into smooth planks. The guards joked with him. One even slapped his shoulder on the way out. Nathan smiled like he always did, tucking the moment away. If they remembered anything about him after tonight, it would be the model inmate who kept to himself. Back in his cell after count, he ate just enough of the evening meal to keep his energy steady, half a biscuit, a spoon of beans, water. Then he sat on the bed, back against the wall, listening to the familiar rise and fall of rec hour in the block. Laughter, the smack of cards on a table, the faint static of music through the intercom. He waited until his own pulse matched that rhythm. At 7:42 p.m., he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he folded his blanket lengthwise, stuffed it with rolled socks and his extra shirt, and laid it under the thin prison sheet. From the cell door, it looked like a man sleeping on his side. Guards never did more than glance inside during the early rounds. Nathan slipped off his shoes and climbed onto the toilet seat. The vent cover was already loose. The gum plugs popped free with a soft, tacky sound. The sawed bars came out one at a time, wrapped in strips of cloth so they wouldn't clang if dropped. He placed them carefully on the floor, then swung his arms up, bracing his elbows in the duct opening. His shoulders squeezed tight through the frame. The cold metal bit into his ribs as he wriggled forward. For a second he thought he might be stuck. But the weight loss paid off. Inch by inch, the cell fell away behind him. Inside the duct, the air was stale, thick with dust. His knees scraped against the sheet metal as he crawled in silence. He paused at each junction, listening for footsteps below. Once, the clang of a distant door made him freeze flat against the metal, holding his breath until the sound faded. It took nearly 15 minutes to reach the exterior wall. The vent there opened onto empty space, 3 stories above the ground. He eased the grate aside and peered out. The night was cold enough to burn his lungs, the yard spread out in silver under the halogen lights. But the construction site loomed just beyond, a cluttered island of shadow. Nathan swung his legs out, dangling them into open air. 3 stories was a long drop, but the packed dirt below would be softer than concrete. He gritted his teeth and pushed off. The impact rattled his bones, but he stayed on his feet. He ran low and fast toward the site, hugging the line of the wall until he reached the first pile of lumber. His breath clouded in the air. The scaffolding was close, just a dozen yards of open ground. He counted down from 3 and sprinted. At the base of the scaffolding, he reached for the sod bars he'd carried from the cell, using them like stakes to dig under the temporary construction fence. 30 centimeters was enough to slide through. Inside, the shadows swallowed him. He moved quickly, stepping between coils of cable and stacks of cinder blocks until his hands found what he'd been hoping for. A steel cable tied to the scaffolding and looped over the wall's top edge. The wall rose above him, 15 feet of concrete topped with razor wire. The cable was rough in his hands, cold biting into his palms as he climbed. Halfway up, a tower guard spotlight swept the far end of the yard. Nathan pressed himself flat against the scaffolding frame, heart hammering until the light moved on. At the top, he swung a leg over and slid down the outside. His boots hit frozen ground. No sirens. No shouts. Just the sound of his own breathing in the night air beyond Redgate's walls. He didn't stop to celebrate. Every second was borrowed time. He kept to the dirt access road running behind the prison until it bent toward a line of trees. The farmhouse came into view minutes later, just a dark shape against darker fields. He tried the back door. Unlocked. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee. A jacket hung on the wall, a pair of work boots sat by the door. He took both, plus $20 in crumpled bills from a ceramic jar on the counter. In the barn, an old 10-speed bike leaned against the wall. Nathan wheeled it out, swung a leg over, and pedaled hard toward the county highway. The wind stung his face, the cold biting through the thin prison shirt. By the time the night shift guard opened the cell door for count, the bedroll sleeping under Nathan's sheet was all that was left. The alarm didn't sound until sunrise. By then, Nathan Cole was already 20 miles away, heading east on 2 wheels toward a future that was as wide open and as dangerous as the road ahead. The first mile was the hardest. Nathan's legs weren't used to the motion of the bike, especially after months of cramped movements inside a cell. Each push on the pedal sent a jolt up through his thighs. But he kept his eyes on the road ahead, not daring to look back at the silhouette of Redgate shrinking in the dark. The highway was empty, just a strip of asphalt winding through frost-bitten fields. The cold air felt sharp in his lungs. His hands were numb, the prison-issue boots too big for the bike pedals. But it was better than the echo of keys and the slam of steel doors. Out here, every sound was different. The whir of the chain, the hiss of wind, the occasional rustle of something moving in the ditch. Nathan had no illusions about being safe. In a few hours, the morning head count would expose the empty cell. Sirens would wail. The yard would flood with guards and search teams would fan out into the countryside. He'd studied enough manhunts to know those first 12 hours were the most dangerous. If they spotted him now, it would be over. He followed the back roads, staying clear of towns. A few miles in, his luck turned. The lights of a gas station flickered up ahead. Small, just 2 pumps and a convenience store attached. The sign said, "Open 24 hours." Nathan didn't need gas, but he needed warmth. He coasted in, leaned the bike against the side wall, and stepped inside. The bell over the door gave a sharp ring. A middle-aged man behind the counter looked up from a newspaper. "Cold night for a ride," he said. Nathan forced a smile. "Bike broke down on the highway. Had to push most of the way here." The clerk shrugged, uninterested in details. "Coffee's fresh." Nathan poured a cup, letting the heat sink into his fingers. He kept his head down, eyes on the rack of travel-sized toiletries. He picked out a disposable razor, a cheap knit hat, and gloves. Paid in the $20 bills from the farmhouse. Back outside, he shaved quickly in the shadow of the dumpster, letting the cold water sting his skin awake. The knit hat went low over his ears, the gloves over his stiff hands. He didn't look like an escaped inmate anymore. He looked like a tired traveler trying to get somewhere. By sunrise, he'd crossed into the next county. A faded sign read, "Welcome to Overton, Pop 3112. Overton was the kind of place where strangers stood out, so Nathan kept moving. He ditched the bike behind an abandoned barn and stuck to walking. His goal wasn't to cover distance fast. It was to disappear. That afternoon, he reached a cluster of houses on the edge of a small town. From the sidewalk, he saw laundry lines strung between porches, kids kicking a ball in the yard. He kept going until he spotted a hand-painted sign, "Room for rent, weekly rates." The woman who answered the door was in her 60s, with a smoker's cough and a suspicious squint. "You work?" she asked. "Just passing through," Nathan said. "Looking for a place to stay a few days." "Got cash?" He held up 2 folded 20s. Her eyes softened at the sight of money. "Room's upstairs. No noise after 10. You share the bathroom." Nathan nodded. The room was small, a single bed, a dresser, a window with thin curtains. He locked the door behind him and lay down, letting the exhaustion wash over him. For the first time in 2 years, there was no guard outside his door. No one counting the minutes he spent in the shower. Just silence. He stayed there for 3 days, venturing out only at night to buy food from the corner store. He kept his head low, avoided conversation, and studied the local newspaper in the diner. No mention of Redgate. Not yet. But it would come. On the 4th day it did. The headline read, "Lifer escapes maximum security, manhunt underway." Nathan's mugshot stared back at him. The intake photo from Redgate taken before he'd lost the weight. In it, his hair was short, his face fuller. Still, it was enough. The description was clear. White male, 30 years old, brown hair, hazel eyes, 5 feet 11 inches, 145 pounds. Last seen wearing prison-issued khakis. He folded the paper and left a $10 bill on the counter. Time to move again. From then on, his movements became methodical. He avoided buses and trains, too many cameras. He walked the smaller roads, hitchhiked only when necessary, always getting out before they hit a city. He stole just enough food and cash to keep moving. A wallet from a laundromat counter, a jacket from the back of a diner booth, a pair of boots from an unlocked car. 2 weeks after the escape, he reached the outskirts of Springfield, Missouri. That's where he met her, Maria Ellis. She worked the night shift at a coffee shop off Highway 60. Nathan came in near closing, bought a black coffee, and sat at the corner booth. Maria noticed the gloves he kept on even while holding the cup. She asked if his hands were cold. He said yes. She brought him an extra cup on the house. Maria had the kind of easy warmth that made people talk. Nathan didn't give her much, just that he was passing through looking for construction work. She didn't press. The next night he came back. By the end of the week they were talking about more than the weather. Maria didn't know, or didn't ask, why he avoided giving a last name. She didn't seem to care. Within a month he was staying at her place above the shop. He helped with groceries, fixed a leaky faucet, took out the trash. To the neighbors he was just Maria's quiet boyfriend. But Nathan never forgot what was outside that door. He still read the papers, still caught the late news. Redgate officials were on the defensive. Reporters grilled the warden about security failures. The U.S. Marshals Service increased the reward to $50,000. Nathan knew the net was tightening. He also knew he couldn't stay in Springfield forever. But for now, the coffee was hot, the bed was warm, and no one was knocking on the door. It was a fragile kind of safety. And in the back of his mind, he knew fragility never lasted long. For a while, Springfield had felt safe. Too safe. Nathan Cole knew that comfort was a dangerous drug. The kind that dulled instincts and made you think the walls weren't closing in. But the truth was they always were. By early spring, 3 months after his escape, Nathan had settled into a careful rhythm. He slept above the coffee shop with Maria Ellis, woke up before dawn to help her open, spent afternoons running errands, and stayed indoors most evenings. He never used his real name, never carried identification, never left a paper trail. But there's only so much you can control. The rest comes down to luck, and luck doesn't last forever. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Maria was at the shop, and Nathan had taken her old Chevy pickup to the car wash on the edge of town. He liked the place. Low traffic, cash only, the kind of business that didn't care who you were as long as you paid. The sun was bright, the air crisp. Nathan pulled the truck into the last bay, feeding quarters into the machine. He scrubbed the hood, hosed the wheel wells, then stepped inside the small office to pay for a quick interior vacuum. He pulled a wad of bills from his pocket, too many for a man who supposedly worked odd jobs, and peeled off a 20 for the wash, another 20 as a tip for the two teenagers working the vacuums. They grinned, thanked him, and went back to work. Nathan thought nothing of it. But inside the main office, the owner, a wiry man in his 50s named Ray Morton, was watching. Ray had lived in Springfield all his life. He'd seen every kind of drifter come through, but something about this one, the gloves and mild weather, the way he scanned the lot before pulling in the roll of cash, put him on alert. Later, he'd say it wasn't just one thing, but a dozen small details that stacked up in his mind. Ray had a friend on the Springfield Police Department, Officer Tom Grady. They played cards together on weekends. And as it happened, Tom had been talking for weeks about the manhunt for an escaped lifer out of Kansas. Nathan didn't know any of that as he pulled away from the car wash. But half an hour later, Tom Grady was in his cruiser, driving toward the shop with Nathan's description in his head. The next day, Nathan went back. Routine was his cover after all. He'd just finished drying the truck when he noticed a police cruiser parked across the street. Grady was inside, pretending to read a clipboard. Nathan felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. The look in the officer's eyes wasn't casual. He didn't run. Running was an admission. Instead, he walked to the truck, got in, and drove off at the speed limit. In the mirror, he saw the cruiser pull out two cars behind him. He turned right, then left, weaving through side streets, always checking the mirror. After 10 minutes, the cruiser was gone. Or maybe just out of sight. Either way, it was enough for Nathan to know his cover had been tested. He went straight back to the apartment and told Maria they had to leave town. Maria didn't understand. Leave? What? What happened? It's not safe here anymore, Nathan said. Someone's asking questions. She pressed him for details, but he wouldn't give them. He'd never told her the truth, not all of it, and he wasn't about to start. The less she knew, the better for both of them. They packed that night. Nathan took only what they could carry in 2 duffel bags. Clothes, a few personal items, the small stash of cash he'd been keeping in an envelope under the floorboard. By dawn, they were heading east towards St. Louis. In St. Louis, Nathan found work under the table at a warehouse loading dock. It was the kind of place where no one cared about your past as long as you could lift heavy boxes and didn't cause trouble. He and Maria rented a furnished basement apartment in a brick building near the river. The landlord didn't ask for references, just cash up front. For a time, the anonymity worked. But Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that the clock was ticking. St. Louis was bigger, busier, but it also meant more eyes, more patrols, more chances for someone to match his face to the worn mugshots still pinned up in precinct break rooms across 3 states. One night, that clock ran out. Nathan was walking back from the warehouse just after midnight. The streets were quiet, the only light coming from a few flickering street lamps. He cut down a side alley, the fastest route to the apartment, and nearly collided with 2 uniformed officers coming from the opposite end. They looked at him, then at each other. One spoke. "Evening. Got some ID on you?" Nathan's pulse spiked. "Left it at home," he said. "Just got off work." "What's your name?" He hesitated for half a beat too long. Mike Turner." The taller officer studied his face. "Mind if we ask a few questions?" Nathan shrugged, forcing a tired smile. "Long day, fellas. Just trying to get home." The shorter one stepped closer. "You look familiar." That was the moment. He could feel the trap tightening. He glanced down the alley, 20 yards to the street. Not far. But far enough that a wrong move would end it here. The taller cop opened his mouth to speak again. Nathan didn't wait to hear the words. He turned and bolted, the sound of boots pounding after him. He cut right at the end of the alley, vaulted a chain-link fence, landed hard on the other side, and kept going. The shouts faded behind him as he ducked into a maze of backyards, over another fence, through a side gate, and finally into the dark of an abandoned lot. He crouched there, catching his breath, listening. No sirens. No voices. Just the night air and his own heartbeat. That close call sealed it. St. Louis was done. Maria wasn't happy when he told her they'd be moving again. She wanted stability, a normal life. Nathan couldn't give her that. She stayed behind when he left. Alone again, Nathan drifted south, deeper into states where his face was less likely to be recognized. But the law never stopped looking. And with every move, every new town, the risk of being spotted grew. Nathan Cole was still free, but freedom was shrinking. It had been since the moment he dropped from Redgate's wall. Nathan Cole had learned to live like a shadow, moving often, speaking little, leaving no trace. But even shadows can't survive without some connection to the living world. And sometimes, it's the people you let in who open the door to your downfall. After St. Louis, Nathan drifted south through Arkansas and into Louisiana. He kept to small towns, finding day work in places where the bosses paid cash and asked no questions. In Pine Hollow, a dusty parish town an hour outside Baton Rouge, he landed a steady gig fixing fences and clearing brush for a local rancher. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept him fed and off the radar. It was there, in a grocery store parking lot, that he ran into her. Lena Ward. He hadn't seen her in years, not since before Redgate. Back then, she was the cousin of a guy Nathan used to run with in Riverton. She'd always been quick-witted, with a sly grin that made you think she knew more than she let on. Now she was in her early 30s, hair tied back in a bandana, loading groceries into the trunk of a faded Buick. "Nate," she said, squinting in the afternoon sun. He froze. Few people alive still called him that. For a split second, his mind raced through options: deny, walk away, bolt. Instead, he gave a cautious nod. They talked by her car for 10 minutes. She'd moved south years ago, worked part-time at a diner, picked up cash bartending on weekends. She didn't ask many questions about where he'd been, and he didn't offer much. But when she mentioned she had a spare room for rent, the offer came out too naturally to ignore. "You could crash there for a bit," she said. "Cheaper than paying some landlord you don't know." Nathan hesitated. He'd been sleeping in the back of the ranch's tool shed. A roof and a locked door sounded tempting. Against his better judgment, he agreed. For the next month, life settled into a dangerous kind of comfort. Nathan worked the ranch by day, stayed in Lena's spare room at night. She never pried into his past, though she hinted she'd heard stories about him. Her tone was always light, almost teasing, but the look in her eyes told him she was weighing something. What Nathan didn't know was that Lena had debts, real ones. A gambling streak at the Riverboat Casino had gone bad. She owed the wrong people and they were pressing hard. A tip about a wanted man could erase all of it. The break came one humid Thursday evening. Nathan had just come back from the ranch, sweat still clinging to his shirt. Lena was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of her, the phone cord twisted around her fingers. She smiled like nothing was wrong, asked him about his day, laughed at a joke he barely remembered making. 2 hours later, she told him she was heading out to meet a friend. Nathan didn't think twice. He showered, ate, and went to bed early. Somewhere across town, Lena was in a quiet booth at the Rusty Anchor Bar, leaning in close to a man in plain clothes. She didn't know his name, but she knew he was law enforcement. Maybe a marshal, maybe state police. The deal was simple: 50 grand for the information, immunity for anything she might have done to help him unknowingly. By midnight, a plan was in motion. 2 unmarked cars would stake out the block, lights off, waiting for him to step outside. But Nathan's instincts were wired for survival. At 2 a.m., he woke to the faint hum of an idling engine outside the house. Too steady to be a neighbor's car, too patient to be anyone just passing through. He got up, crossed the room silently, and pulled back the curtain a fraction. A dark sedan sat at the curb, no interior lights, no movement. Every nerve in his body went rigid. He didn't bother with the duffel bag. Whatever he needed, he could find later. He slid his boots on, grabbed his jacket, and eased open the back window. The screen came out without a sound. He dropped into the damp grass and crouched low, skirting the fence line to the alley. Halfway down the alley, movement caught his eye, another shadow shifting where the streetlight didn't reach. A man's voice called out, "Cole, federal marshals. Don't make this harder." He ran. Shouts erupted behind him, followed by the pounding of feet. The alley funneled into a narrow gap between 2 garages. He squeezed through, vaulted a wooden fence, and landed in someone's backyard. A dog barked furiously, chains rattling. Nathan kept moving, breath sharp in his ears. The chase lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt longer. Twice, flashlights swept so close he could see the dust motes in the beams. Twice, he flattened himself against walls, willing the darkness to hold him. Finally, he reached the drainage canal at the edge of town, a shallow trench lined with concrete. He slid down, crouched low, and followed it under a road until the shouts faded. When he emerged on the other side, the night was quiet again. Nathan didn't stop moving until sunrise. By then he was miles from Pine Hollow, his shirt torn, hands scraped raw. Somewhere behind him, Lena Ward was explaining herself to men who didn't much care about her reasons. He didn't know if she'd gotten the money. He didn't care. All he knew was that the circle was tightening. If the marshals had been waiting in Pine Hollow, they could be waiting anywhere. For Nathan Cole, trust was officially off the table. From here on, he was on his own. After Pine Hollow, Nathan Cole moved like a man walking the edge of a blade. Every town looked the same to him now: The diner with the cracked linoleum floor, the gas station with flickering lights, the motel that smelled of mildew and stale smoke. But the sameness was deceptive. Somewhere out there, his face was still pinned to bulletin boards and police stations, still flashing across the screens of Marshal Service briefings. For 2 more months, he slipped between places, heading north this time, away from the swampy lowlands and into colder territory. He worked odd jobs under names that changed every week: Mike Turner, Jack Morris, Tom Green. He used cash for everything. If a clerk asked too many questions, he'd walk out without buying a thing. But no one can keep that pace forever. It was early November when he ended up in Millbrook, Ohio, a mid-sized industrial town where winter always seemed to come early. The air was already sharp, the first traces of frost dusting the grass in the mornings. Nathan rented a single-room apartment above a hardware store from a landlord who cared more about rent being on time than who was paying it. He kept to himself, eating at the same corner diner every night, his back always to the wall, eyes on the door. The routine almost worked. But then came the neighbor. Her name was Angela Price, mid-40s, a widow who lived across the hall. She was friendly in a way that felt genuine, bringing him leftover stew one night, asking if he needed anything from the store the next. Nathan was polite, careful, but he underestimated her memory. She'd been a volunteer at a local charity the year before, one that had hosted a regional law enforcement fundraiser. At that event, she'd seen a bulletin on a board, the same one the marshals had circulated for years. It took her a week to be sure. The beard was longer now, the hair a little shaggier, but the eyes, she remembered those. She didn't confront him. She called the Millbrook Police Department. The call was routed to the U.S. Marshals Service within the hour. By midnight they had a plan. A team of 6 would take him in, 2 covering the back exit, 2 the stairwell, 2 at the front door. They chose the early morning, the time when most people were still heavy with sleep. Nathan didn't know any of this when he woke at 5:30 a.m., intending to make coffee and head out before the streets got busy. He was halfway through buttoning his shirt when he heard it, the faint creak of the stairwell door. Too early for the landlord. Too quiet for the other tenants. His body reacted before his mind caught up. He moved to the window, looked down, 2 men in plain jackets standing by the back alley, hands near their belts. He knew then. It was over, or it was about to be. Nathan grabbed his jacket, slipped his wallet, fake ID and all, into the pocket and stepped into the hallway. He made it 3 steps toward the back exit before a voice from below barked, "Nathan Cole." "Yes, marshals. Hands where we can see them." For a split second, the hallway seemed to shrink around him. He could run back to his apartment, try the fire escape. But he could hear boots on the stairs now, heavy and certain. He turned toward the back exit anyway. The door swung open before he got there, another marshal filling the frame. The man was calm, but his stance left no doubt. He was ready to bring Nathan down hard if he had to. "Don't make this worse," the marshal said. Nathan's eyes flicked between them, the 2 behind, the 2 ahead. No gaps. No angles. Just the end of the line. For the first time in years, he let his shoulders drop. "You got me," he said quietly. The cuffs went on cold against his wrists. They walked him down the stairs, through the front of the building, past the diner where he'd sat for so many nights without anyone knowing who he really was. A small crowd had already gathered. Neighbors, early risers, the landlord standing in his robe with a look halfway between shock and satisfaction. At the curb, a dark SUV idled. One of the marshals opened the door, guiding Nathan inside. The air smelled faintly of leather and gun oil. As they pulled away, he caught a final glimpse of the street disappearing behind them. In the official record, his arrest was described as without incident. No one mentioned the 3 years of pursuit, the close calls, the betrayals, or the lives he'd touched and unsettled along the way. In court, the judge added 25 years to his original life sentence. There was no speech from Nathan, no plea for leniency. He listened, nodded once, and let them take him back into the federal system, a system he knew better than most men alive. Back in a cell, the noise of the outside world faded again. He took up reading, then writing, pages filled with accounts of the years he'd spent in the wind. Sometimes, when other inmates asked him if it was worth it, he'd give the same answer every time. It was freedom, he'd say. And freedom's never free.